In 1952, the average American kitchen ran on grease pencils, party lines, and a mother who knew 40 phone numbers by heart. No screens, no GPS, no algorithm telling anyone what to do next. And somehow, they raised the most connected generation this country has ever produced. Let's count down 25 ways Americans lived without ever touching a piece of technology. Number 25, memorizing phone numbers. Before your pocket did the remembering for you, your mother carried 24 numbers in her head without ever writing them down. Your grandmother's line, the doctor's office, the corner drugstore, all of it filed away like a hymn she'd sung 1,000 times. Kids recited their own home number before they could tie their shoes, just in case they wandered off at the 5 and dime. There was a pad screwed to the wall by the kitchen phone, sure, but that was for strangers, not for the people who mattered. Every number you kept in your skull was a person you cared enough about to carry. Somewhere along the way, we handed that job to a device and called it progress. Most folks today couldn't tell you their own husband's cell number if you asked them cold, and something about that ought to bother us more than it does. Number 24, the road atlas in the glove box. Every American car carried a Rand McNally folded so many times the creases had gone soft and white at the edges. The night before a trip to the mountains, your father spread that map across the kitchen table and traced the route in pencil while your mother leaned over his shoulder, correcting him on the shortest way through the hill country. Reading a map was a real skill. Thumb against the scale, sun position, telling you which way was west when the road signs ran out. Families got lost plenty, and getting lost was half the trip, because a wrong turn back then meant a roadside diner you'd never forget instead of a red line rerouting you back to the interstate. Now, a voice in the dashboard tells you to turn in 500 feet, and nobody ever looks up to see what they're driving past. Number 23, TV guide on the kitchen table. Every Thursday it landed in the mailbox, and Friday night your mother sat down with a pen circling what mattered for the week ahead. The whole block knew the same schedule because the whole block read the same little digest, thin as the church bulletin and just as trusted. It wasn't just a listing, it was a shared clock the entire country ran on, the same way the church bell used to tell a town when it was noon. When something big happened on the television, everybody tuned in at once because everybody had already marked the page days before it aired. These days, we scroll through more choices than any human being could watch in a lifetime, and somehow can't find a single thing worth finishing before bed. Number 22, the library card catalog. Long before a search bar existed, Americans solved their questions in a room that smelled like old paper and floor wax. A wooden cabinet of narrow drawers held the whole world sorted by author, title, and subject, and every fourth grader learned the numbering system like it was arithmetic. Because, in a way, it was. You wrote down your call number on a slip of scrap paper, walked the stacks counting shelves, and sometimes the book you found wasn't the one you were after, but it taught you something you didn't know you needed anyway. Librarians knew your name and your children's names, and they'd set a book aside behind the desk if they thought it might suit you. That cabinet is gone from most branches now, sold off as furniture at estate sales, and the patience it built went right along with it. Number 21, sitting down to write a letter. A stamp cost pennies, and Americans use them by the billion, folding their thoughts into an envelope the way you'd fold a quilt. Your grandmother wrote to her sister every single Sunday, fountain pen in hand. 3 pages describing a week that most people wouldn't think worth mentioning to anybody at all. Soldiers wrote home from places they weren't allowed to name. Sweethearts rode across state lines for years before they ever stood at the same altar. You could read someone's mood in the slant of their handwriting before you ever got to the words themselves, the pressure of the pen telling you more than the sentence did. People kept those letters in shoe boxes for 50 years, tied with ribbon like they were something sacred, which they were. A text disappears the moment you send it, and nobody thinks twice. A letter meant you sat down long enough to prove somebody mattered. If you want to learn more about American survival history, hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Number 20, the recipe box on top of the icebox. Every kitchen had a little tin full of index cards, splattered and soft from decades of Thursday suppers cooked the exact same way each time. Your grandmother's meatloaf lived on one card, Aunt Ruth's pie on another, all of it in handwriting that told you exactly who made it without needing a signature at the bottom. Brides got sent off with a starter box full of cards from every woman at the shower, each one a little piece of somebody's kitchen wisdom, folded into your new life. When your grandmother passed, that tin box was the thing everybody quietly wanted because it held her better than any photograph on the wall could. Recipes live in an app now, and apps die with a cracked screen and take 3 generations of Thursday dinners with them. Number 19, the milkman's morning route. 3 times a week you'd hear glass bottles clinking before the sun came up, and there on the porch sat fresh milk, butter, and eggs left by a man who knew every family on his route by name and by taste. Since some houses wanted their cream skimmed thick and others wanted it left plain, kids raced out barefoot on cold wood to grab the bottles before school, competing to see who could carry the most without dropping one on the step. The cream sitting thick on top got skimmed off for the morning coffee, and nothing bought at the store since has ever tasted quite like it. He knew whose baby had just arrived and whose grandfather had taken a turn for the worse, and he'd leave an extra quart without being asked if times looked hard that month. Convenience eventually replaced him one delivery truck at a time, and something about knowing your neighborhood went with it. Number 18, the Family Encyclopedia set. A full set of leather-bound volumes once cost nearly a month's wages, and door-to-door salesmen made it the second best-selling collection of books in the country behind the Bible itself. That row of spines on the shelf wasn't decoration. It was where homework got done, cracked open to whatever letter held the answer while a lamp burned late at the dining table. You didn't search for one fact. You browsed, and browsing meant stumbling onto things you never knew you wanted to know. 3 pages deep into an article about volcanoes when you'd only meant to look up Vermont. Parents saved for years on installment plans just to own a set, $10 a month, until the whole row finally sat complete on the shelf. Printing stopped for good in 2012, and the studies that came after showed something we should have expected. Kids who grew up flipping real pages held on to more of what they learned than the ones who simply typed a question and moved on. Number 17, knowing your banker by his first name. Before automatic deposits and apps that show your balance in real time, Americans carried a little paper passbook down to the local branch and handed it across the counter to a teller who'd known their family for 20 years. He'd stamp the new balance right there in ink while asking after your children by name and remembering which one had just started school that fall. Loans got approved on a handshake and a reputation built over decades in the same town. No committee 3 states away deciding your worth off a number. Nobody worried about a bank vanishing overnight because the man behind the counter lived 3 streets over and answered to the same church congregation every Sunday morning. Banking used to be a relationship you could look in the eye. Now it's a log-in screen that doesn't know you exist and never will. Number 16, drying clothes on the line. Nobody owned a machine that tumbled and heated, so every backyard in America strung a rope between 2 poles and pinned the wash up to dry in whatever wind the afternoon offered. Your grandmother knew exactly how long a shirt needed on a windy day versus a still one, and she could tell by the smell alone whether the sheets were ready to bring in before supper. Sheets pulled off the line at dusk smelled like nothing a bottle has ever managed to bottle since. Sun and wind worked into the cotton in a way no dryer sheet has ever come close to faking. Hanging wash was a chore, but it was also an excuse to stand outside and talk over the fence with whoever else was pinning up their own laundry that same afternoon. The dryer saved time. It also emptied the backyard of every conversation that used to happen there. Number 15, the running tab at the corner grocery. Long before plastic cards existed, the man behind the counter at the corner store kept a ledger with your family's name written at the top of a page, and you paid what you owed at the end of the month when the paycheck finally came in. He trusted you because he'd trusted your father before you, and that trust was worth more than any interest rate a bank could ever offer a stranger. If times got tight, he might let the balance run a little longer without ever saying a word about it, sliding an extra can of something into the bag on his own. That kind of grace doesn't show up on a credit report anywhere. It only existed because 2 families had known each other longer than either one could rightly remember. Number 14, family game night around the table. No screens waited in every pocket, so evenings belonged to a deck of cards or a well-worn box of checkers pulled down from the closet shelf after supper was cleared. Grandfathers taught grandsons how to bluff at gin rummy, dealing slow and explaining every rule twice before the first real hand was played. Sisters fought over Monopoly money until somebody's mother called it for bedtime. The board left half finished on the table for the morning. These weren't special occasions, they happened most nights of the week, and they taught patience, strategy, and how to lose gracefully in front of people who loved you anyway and would deal you back in the next round. A house full of laughter over a card table did more for a family than any device has ever managed to replicate in a glowing rectangle nobody's really looking up from. Number 13, the barber shop as the neighborhood living room. A haircut took 20 minutes, but men sat around for 2 hours anyway because the barber shop was where the real news of the town got traded before the newspaper ever printed it the following morning. Who got married, who lost a job, who was expecting, all of it passed across that chair along with the clippings scattered on the floor. The barber knew everybody's politics and kept his own opinions mostly to himself while he worked the scissors around an ear, letting the customers argue it out instead. It was a place a boy went with his father and came out feeling like a man, not because of the haircut, but because of who he'd sat among and what he'd been allowed to listen to. Number 12, fixing things with your own 2 hands. When something broke, you didn't call a service line and wait on hold, you pulled a toolbox down from the shelf and figured it out, because your father had taught you how a hinge worked, and your grandfather had taught him before that. A leaky faucet, a loose porch board, a stalled engine, all of it got solved with a wrench and enough daylight to see by, sometimes with a neighbor leaning over the fence offering advice whether you'd ask for it or not. Neighbors lent tools back and forth and traded know-how the same way they traded vegetables from the garden. No charge, just the expectation you'd return the favor someday. That kind of competence built quiet confidence in a person that no amount of money could buy outright. Somewhere along the way, we started outsourcing every small repair, and along with it, the satisfaction of standing back from something you'd fixed with your own two hands. Number 11, the Saturday matinee downtown. For a dime, a kid could disappear into a dark theater for an entire afternoon, a newsreel, a cartoon, and a picture, all before the sun even thought about going down. Mothers sent their children off after breakfast and didn't worry a bit, because half the neighborhood's kids were in that same theater, and the usher knew every one of them by face, if not by name. It was the whole town's babysitter and its shared imagination all rolled into one dark room, smelling of popcorn and floor wax. Every kid in class had seen the same picture that weekend, which meant every kid had something to talk about come Monday morning that had nothing whatsoever to do with a screen in their pocket. Number 10, the drive-in on a summer night. Families packed into the car with a bag of popcorn made at home because the concession stand was for treats, not the whole meal. Not when a family had 5 mouths to feed. Kids in pajamas sprawled across the hood or the back seat, while the picture flickered against a screen the size of a barn wall. The speaker hooked crooked on the window glass. It cost almost nothing per car, no matter how many people you squeezed inside, so whole families went together instead of splitting off into separate rooms with separate screens later that night. Half the fun wasn't even the movie. It was the ball game kids played in the gravel lot before it started, or the neighbors parked 2 spots over waving hello through the windshield glass. Number 9. The salesman who came to your door. A man with a case full of brushes or pots and pans would walk the neighborhood on a set day every month, and your grandmother knew him well enough to invite him in for coffee, whether she bought anything or not that visit. He carried news from 3 streets over along with his wares, trading gossip for a sale the same way the barber did, and buying from him meant supporting somebody you actually knew, rather than a warehouse 1,000 miles away with no face attached to it. These men built entire careers on nothing but a friendly face and a good product, and families built loyalty to certain brands simply because of who sold it to them right there at the door. There was no algorithm deciding what showed up on your porch that week. There was just a man who remembered your name and your children's birthdays besides. Number 8, gathering around the radio after supper. Before the television took over the living room, the whole family pulled chairs close to a wooden box with a glowing dial and listened together while the fire crackled low behind them. A detective drama, a comedy hour. A president speaking directly into your parlor from 1,000 miles away, and every ear in the house leaned toward the same sound at the very same moment. Nobody had a picture to look at, so the imagination did the work instead, building the whole scene out of nothing but voices and a few sound effects thrown in for good measure. When Roosevelt spoke during the hardest years this country ever saw, Something close to half the nation was listening at the very same time, all of them alone, in their own separate houses and somehow together anyway, joined by nothing but a wire and a wooden speaker. Number 7, the road trip with no map app running. A family pulled out of the driveway with a full tank, a thermos of coffee, and no real idea what waited around the next bend in the road. When you got turned around, and you always did eventually, you rolled into a filling station and asked the man in the bow tie, who'd mark an X on a free paper map and send you off with directions that actually made sense once you got moving. Getting lost wasn't a failure, it was how you found the diner nobody talks about anymore. Or the lake you ended up swimming in purely by accident on a hot afternoon. Now, everybody follows a blue line on a screen, and nobody ever looks up long enough to notice what they drove straight past without a second glance. Number 6, paying it off a little at a time on layaway. Your mother would walk into the department store in October, pick out the bicycle sitting under the Christmas display, and hand over a few dollars as a down payment right there at the counter. Every week after that, she came back with a little more until the balance was finally clear, and only then did she carry it home wrapped under her arm. There was no interest charged and no debt hanging over the family come January. No bill arriving after the tree had already come down. It taught patience in a way nothing since has managed to, because Christmas morning meant something entirely different when you knew exactly how many weeks of saving had gone into that one gift waiting under the tree. Number 5, the paper route before sunrise. A 12-year-old boy on a bicycle with a canvas bag slung across his shoulders learned more about running a business before breakfast than most adults learn in a decade of working for somebody else. He knew which porches wanted the paper tucked behind the screen door and which ones wanted it tossed square onto the mat. And he collected his money in person every Friday evening, making change out of his own pocket without a calculator to help him. It was a boy's first job, his first taste of showing up on time, no matter the weather, rain or snow past his ankles, or a bicycle chain that kept slipping loose. Somewhere along the line, we stopped handing kids that kind of responsibility, and a little bit of character went missing right along with it. Number 4, canning season in August. The whole house filled with the smell of vinegar and simmering tomatoes for a solid week every late summer. Jars lined up along the counter, waiting their turn in the boiling bath, one batch at a time. Your grandmother put up green beans, strawberry jam, dill pickles, and enough tomato sauce to carry the family clean through to spring without ever visiting a store. A basement shelf full of colored glass was the family's insurance policy against a hard winter, built with nothing but a garden, a stove, and patience passed mother to daughter on a hot porch stringing beans. We traded that pantry for a delivery truck. Somewhere along the way, we started calling the trade a step forward. Number 3, the front porch in the evening. Before air conditioning pulled everybody indoors and shut the door behind them for good, summer nights belonged to a porch swing and whoever wandered by to sit on the steps and talk a while before heading home. Grandparents fanned themselves and watched the street, while children chased fireflies past bedtime, and news traveled house to house simply because people were sitting outside long enough to hear it firsthand. A neighbor could tell you 11 names on the block back then without thinking twice about it, and today most folks couldn't get past 2 or 3. If you gave them a minute, the porch is usually still standing on most of these old houses. It's just sitting empty most evenings now, waiting for somebody to remember exactly what it was for. Number 2, sharing a telephone line with the whole street. For decades, your phone line didn't belong to just your family. It belonged to half a dozen households at once, each one with its own pattern of rings, so you'd know a call was meant for you specifically. You'd pick up sometimes and hear Mrs. Henderson already deep in conversation with her sister 2 towns over, and you'd hang up polite and try again later without a bit of resentment about it. Word of a sickness or a new baby spread down that shared line in under an hour. Whether or not it was strictly any of your business to know, yes, there was a little eavesdropping built right into the system. Everybody knew it and mostly let it slide. But there was also a whole neighborhood wired together in a way no private number has managed to replicate since. And in first place, Sunday dinner around a table set for a dozen. After church, every single week, your grandmother laid out roast beef, mashed potatoes, and green beans she'd put up herself back in August, with a pie waiting patiently on the sideboard for later. 3 generations sat down together without fail, grandfathers telling stories nobody had heard the true ending of, uncles arguing baseball scores, cousins meeting the people they'd end up marrying 20 years down the road at that very table. The meal ran 4 hours some weeks, and not one soul reached for a screen, because there wasn't a single one in the house to reach for in the first place. That single hour a week did more to tell a child who they were and where they came from than anything invented since has managed to replace it with. So here's my challenge for you this week. Pick just one. Call a number you used to have memorized before your phone did the remembering for you. Sit out on the porch after supper instead of heading straight inside to the couch. Write an actual letter and mail it, stamp and all. Turn off the map and see where a wrong turn takes you on a Saturday afternoon. Or better yet, get the whole family around one table this Sunday with the phones left in another room entirely, and see how long the conversation actually lasts. Then come back and tell me if it felt different, because your grandparents weren't missing out on anything at all. They were connected in ways most of us have simply forgotten how to be. Tell me down in the comments which one you're going to try, because I genuinely want to know. And hit that subscribe button, because sometimes the old ways weren't the old ways at all. They were just the right ways, waiting patiently for us to remember them